Eric, I learned some things in this episode, man. I probably wish I didn't know.
Yeah, I let's just say that the great worms of Tolkien are not the
Mm-mm.
scariest out there by any means.
Not even close. I think there's going to be a lot of men doing a new novel activity in the shower after this episode. We are talking about everyone's favorite hormone, testosterone, today, but in a different light because let's face it, there's heavy marketing. There's a lot of financial interest lately in TRT, testosterone replacement therapy. And so it is a big catch-all buzz term that a lot of people are probably vaguely familiar with. You might hear someone anecdotally sharing their experience on an ad in a video recommending it. But we're doing a very deep dive today with Mr. Dr. Ben House.
Yeah, it's great to have Ben House back on because he's been looking into this topic for years. I've had the pleasure of being out at his fitness retreat in Costa Rica, which was a great experience right before the COVID pandemic really hit.
Yep.
It's like the last time I traveled out of the country. I think that was February of 2020. And his breadth of knowledge and depth of knowledge on endocrinology is very impressive. And he, of course, has a lot of knowledge on the lifting community. So the intersection there is really cool. And I'll say this: this is not a pro or con TRT or HRT episode. It is informing you about it. And I will tell you this: there's a high probability it's not what you think.
No, that is probably the best way to say it, Eric. There is a very interesting stat that we go over where seemingly, testosterone might be for a wide variety of reasons, this panacea for people seemingly. But when we talk about the concept that many people that go on end up going off, I mean, we're talking 85%, I believe, or at that very, very low range, 60 to 85%. There's something there.
Yeah, no. It's within 1 year, people who go on HRT, 80 to 85% of them stop.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that could be for a multitude of reasons, which we actually talk about. But to me, that blew me away for how, I guess, positively spun, or maybe it's just a bias towards the people who are having a good experience or sharing it, and those who don't have a good experience aren't. So we aren't seeing all like the graveyard, as you would say. But yeah, that's crazy to me because I know so many men who expect it to be the thing that changes their lives, and they attribute many of their issues to the fact that they think they have low testosterone, and then they get tested and it's low normalish. Sure, well, let me go get on this stuff, and then it doesn't apparently solve the problem, or it's not worth it, whatever side effects, or just they don't want to have to pin themselves for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is stuff we go over in the main episode. I don't want this intro to linger on too much because this is such a fantastic topic, and Ben really goes in. So let me just say, you're in for a treat.
Folks, this is a juicy episode. Eric, we're going there, boy. We're talking about testosterone, I believe is kind of the colloquial way of saying it. And it's an endearing way. Like, you want to talk about something serious, you want to talk about something complex, just defang it a little bit by giving it a cute nickname. Testosterone with Dr. Ben House in the house. I always mess this up. Mr. Dr. Ben House in the house. Back with another episode. Super excited. He is one of our favorite guests. Yes, I collectively said that between myself and Eric. What's going on, Dr. House?
What's going on, man? I think you hit the nail on the head, and that I'll use a Carmine Falcone reference from the only Batman series that ever matters. Is we always fear what we don't understand. And Eric's talked about this in previous episodes, is like this idea of informed consent, or just making an educated decision versus making a very flippant decision about these things. And that's really my goal for coming on is to potentially help people navigate who are maybe in the niche of like potentially like interested, right? They're on the fringes, like, oh, I'm interested in this thing. Let's have a non-moral, let's just have an amoral conversation, just have an objective conversation with no judgment about drugs, and their potential utility, what they can do, what they can't do, and what are the potential side effects on the individual level.
I think it's an important conversation as well, because it is a different conversation than deciding to quote unquote hop on gear, which I believe is what the cool kids are saying, to go to a doctor, get a legit diagnosis, and then get a prescription for testosterone replacement therapy or hormone replacement therapy. Because there is the average person is not a expert on this and has not done the research. And I think very naturally what they would do is they would trust the expert. And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't trust endocrinologists or experts. That's not where I'm going with this. But I'm just saying that just like when I would go to a mechanic and know zero about my car, if they told me this would be the pathway to go, I'm probably going to go sweet, and I'm going to run that plastic through the credit card scanner, you know? So I think it's important just to be aware of the difference between what your doctor might tell you, what an endocrinologist might recommend, versus using the internet, which we know can find anything, to already have pre-chosen and pre-selected, hey, this is my problem. I feel fatigue, you know, I'm having a bit of a midlife crisis. I can say that. I'm 38. I resemble that comment, and I'm gonna go online, and I know the solution already is to get on HRT. So let me find the clinic that will do that for me. Let me find the clinic that has the expertise credential, but we all know is going to say yes pretty much no matter who walks through the door, so long as that number is below a certain threshold. So that's different than you know, having a legitimate clinical concern, going to a doctor and getting a prescription. And of course, testosterone replacement therapy is incredibly important for hypogonadal people and is a tool that should be used. So I think it's important. I just wanted to make that distinction really clear on the front end. And then what I want to do, I want to kick it over to you, Ben. Again, thank you for coming on. I do want to echo what Omar said. It's always a pleasure. And give us some context here. So I know there's a lot of people in our circle who know exactly what we're talking about. But there are probably some people who are going, the what RT now? So give us some context here. Paint the picture. Set the scene. So,
yeah, we've had a quadrupling in TRT prescriptions. That research is from 2001 to 2011. It's kind of nebulous whether that's gone up in the last decade, because you had some fear around it, and that was like the cardiac issues came to the scene, and so we've had the TRT has increased a lot. And it's increased in populations where you may not have expected it to increase, and that's like 35 to 45-year-old males. And so I think the best way to really look at this is, so the risk of being hypogonadal on a blood draw, which is debatable where that range is. Like, different labs have different ranges, right? If Mayo Clinic is 300, Travison has different ranges based on how old you are. But 1 in 4 adult men right now in Western society, if you pop them on a blood draw, they might pop for low testosterone. And so that's why the ads that come up in your Instagram feed for just like, get your testosterone measured, they're not that innocent. They look innocent. It looks like, oh, we're going to measure this thing. But this is where like false positives are potentially a very big deal, because the diurnal variation of testosterone is a very, very big deal. And that it could go down 30% upon waking. So if your draw happens at 8 a.m. and you normally wake up at 5 a.m., that could push you into that hypogonadal range, right? And then another really, really big deal is that 50% of people upon repeat testing will no longer be hypogonadal. So that's why if you look at the Endocrine Society guidelines, they want 2 tests at least. And a lot of insurance companies, they need to see 2 tests that are hypogonadal. Now, if you're going into this just wanting drugs, like, that's a very different thing. Like, you can make yourself go hypogonadal, just like sleep deprive yourself, overtrain, don't eat, make your energy availability go down. You can go get drugs. Like, there's plenty of clinics that will just give you drugs, right? They just have to find a reason. But if you want to have a different conversation about if you potentially want to do this, if this is in your best interest long term, objectively, that's really the conversation that I want to have. Because I think a lot of people get into this, and they get into it kind of flippantly, like, oh, my testosterone is low, I'll just take testosterone. Like, this is creatine. and it's actually really interesting because in Costa Rica, where I live half the year, testosterone is legal.
Mm-hmm.
So when I first talked to some Costa Ricans about testosterone, they're like, yeah, it's like creatine. You just take it, you load it, you take it out. I'm like, no. This is like, you could shut down your hypothalamic pituitary testicular axis. You could shut that down forever. This isn't like 3 to 5 grams on repeat forever, bro. And so I think knowing the risks objectively, and I'm not trying to sell fear here. I just want to like have a conversation, because if you're potentially making this decision, drugs or no drugs, and I understand that we're probably everyone on this call and the majority of people listening on this call, like, let's be honest, you've probably contemplated doing some drugs. Like you've probably made that at least that thought has gone through your mind. And so I just think we can really, if we're going to nip this and really have informed consent, let's get into all the reasons that you could potentially have low T and what you should expect from that physician, from that endocrinologist, what you should go into that appointment like really expecting versus, oh, your testosterone is low. Here's the EFT payment for, I don't know, forever.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you said why your testosterone is low there. And before I get into that, first I want to clear up one thing. I've never had an unclean thought. I'm a natural bodybuilder, and I've always thought about being natural. No, I'm just kidding. In all seriousness, like back in the pro-hormone craze when I was a young man, I jumped on that right away. It's over-the-counter legal at GNC, or you can buy it on bodybuilding. And I had bodybuilding.com, and I had to actively then wait out a certain amount of time for not having taken pro-hormones before I could compete in natural bodybuilding federations. Something I've always shared because I think it's a bit of a cautionary tale. Like it's just like the people from Costa Rica. You don't really necessarily realize what you're getting into if it seems like the availability is right there, and that's the difference. And we were talking off air how, and I think it's very clear when you speak to some IFBB pros or some coaches of those types of athletes, like we had a prior episode on, that a lot of research goes into those types of decisions, because they are potentially aware of that, gamble they're making, that I'm probably going to be on this long term, not the dosages I'm taking to compete, but what I need to be back to normal after I'm done competing and being 280 pounds or whatever it is. So I think, people do a lot of research, not always, typically, or at least they should, when they're getting into illicit use for performance enhancing drugs. But when it's over the counter, like it is in many countries, or when it's via prescription quite easily, just by doing a mini cut, you can very easily just assume that the risk is not there, and I think that's a great thing that we want to get around. So anyway, going back to what I was saying, actually, which is what you were saying, is that there's a reason for low testosterone. If it's happening in 25% of, like when you see a hormonal level lower, that's a signal, right? And there's a cause for that. And yes, you can just replace it, but it makes you wonder, do you have a mineral deficiency? Do you have cancer? Like there's so many things that can cause these hormones to be out of whack. And you probably just don't want to like copy paste over that with just injecting it without being aware of those potential causes.
And then real quick, what was the figure? Remember, we had to reference another Iron Culture episode, James Krieger, I should say. I'm not sure if he has the doctor distinction. Eric's like, he does not. Omar, what are you doing?
He has 2 master's degrees, so if you wanted to trade up,
stack it up.
Yeah, exactly. That's similar or at least equivalent in like a poker game. If I threw down my doctorate, he could throw down his 2 masters, right. And that would be like that'd be a call. So yeah.
Because Dr. Benhouse, Mr. Dr. Benhouse would know this about obesity and the interplay between that then and overall testosterone levels. We're talking about those that, merely losing some weight, the large factor that it can contribute to testosterone levels. What factor does that play into the whole conversation? We said 25% potentially have low testosterone. Then we look at the obesity rate in some place like America. And then the conversation sometimes probably could revolve around, one's body composition, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about confounders here and this is honestly a big debate, has testosterone gone down longitudinally over time? It's same with semen quantities and qualities. Like these are actually big debates in the male health sphere. And so one of the like, does testosterone decrease with age? And there's and I'm not going to say that there's one opinion is valid over the other, but it does look like the lower quartile of testosterone is potentially the main driver of the population mean decrease. And so remember, means are groups of individuals. And so if if you look at the studies, if you look at the scatter plots at around 60, all of a sudden you start getting a lot of these bubbles on the low end of testosterone. And there's a big push to say that if you're healthy and you're in the upper 50th or 75th percentile, your testosterone may not go down to the same extent that lower percentile does. And so just to kind of put this in maybe more numbers, is like 1 in 4 over 30 are potentially would have low testosterone if you just randomly drug tested them or randomly testosterone tested them. Which you've talked about before is kind of like a drug test. Now it's 4-1 based on those two things, which is episode 29. Go back, listen to it. Very good. And so now if we think about obesity, it's now up to 36%. So 36% of young, quote unquote, healthy men, if you're obese, that increases your likelihood of hypogonadism by, that's on a test. Like, remember, the definition of hypogonadism is not just low testosterone. This is a very, very important distinction. Like, yes, that's an important part, but the other part is symptomatology. And so where this becomes really, really important is I heard that y'all might be releasing a podcast on dare I say, running.
Yes. Unfortunately.
And so Anthony Hackney out of UNC Chapel Hill, amazing individual, spent his whole life researching this subject. He's in endurance training. And so there's something called the endurance-induced hypogonadal. And that is endurance athletes will generally see a 25 to 35% decrease in their testosterone over the lifetime of their career. It's part of the game, right? But they don't have the symptomatology. And so like that's debatable if you're a cyclist, why is that happening? And so the most interesting thing to me and what people aren't necessarily what we've proven as humans, what we're not very good at in the last 2 years is thinking about multivariate and multifactorial thinking, right? We want one cause thinking, but there's so many things that could tie into low testosterone. You think about the biggest one for bodybuilders, for people listening to the cult, honestly, it's varicoceles. So and people might not even know what that word means. A varicocele is an enlarged vein in your testicle. And there's crazy papers where varicoceles are estimated in 60-80% of bodybuilders. Wow. And varicoceles will drop your testosterone by about 150 nanograms per deciliter, which is a potentially 20% drop. And so like so if you go to the doctor.
Did you just tell me that I have a 7 out of 10 chance of having a varicocele?
I'm not like those are like member sampling bias, that's survey data.
Like, did myself and Eric qualify? You think, or
you can?
Eric, next time I'm in New Zealand, we'll do the test together.
Is there a certain palpation method that you can show us?
You just feel the balls, and if it feels like a bag of worms, you probably that is legitimately look it up on the internet. That is what it'll tell you. If it feels like a bag of worms, go to the doctor. And ironically, so we have this is pretty cool because I've been thinking about this a long time, and so we've had this argument about like whether and I think Derek Drexler was
Aaron,
like
it's Nordic.
Aaron Drexler.
We can only assume with that name he's on the lowest. Yeah, go on. Anyways,
it's actually the same as that serial killer show, Dexter. I think that's the one. Yeah,
based on his life story.
Yeah. Somehow he did an article, a guest article. He's not on there full time, but he does get a great guest article for Massive. Like just I don't know, it was a one trick pony or something.
Yeah.
But he did it on like fat intake and testosterone, because it does look like if you increase your fat intake above 40%, potentially you will increase your serum testosterone. Lots of confounders there, don't want to get into it, but he made the argument that I am in agreement with at this point in time, not in agreement completely, but just we don't have the evidence. Like, I don't know if gaining 150 nanograms per deciliter in your testosterone, time point to time point, number one, I can't promise that's statistically significant. Because of the variation in the draws, I can't promise that. Like, I can give you links which look at biological variation and lab variation in those draws, and it's generally about a 200 nanogram per window that they have there for statistically significant time point to time point. And so not only do I not know if it's statistically significant on the individual level, but I just don't know if it matters. Yeah. And so, like, a lot of people, they extrapolate the drug literature, like dose responses to drugs. You can't do that. Like, I'm gonna make a very clear stance here. You can't look at dose response drug literature of like 25 milligrams, 50 milligrams, 100 milligrams, 125 milligrams, 300 milligrams, 600 milligrams, and you can't say that going up that way is the same as going up physiologically, because when you go up that way, you kick diurnal rhythm of testosterone. You just kill it. You blare it out. And I'm sure Omar's got a musical reference that he can give us. But like, normally, if you think about the curve for a normal meal, like natural meal, we'll say 650 at 6 a.m. And then at around 4 p.m., they'll probably be around 350 to 400, right? And we know, I don't like to say that we know thing, but for drugs, it seems to be dose and duration. So area under the curve. So even TRT dosages, which is normally 100 to 150 megs per week, your testicles, a normal male's testicles, will produce about 4 to 9 milligrams per day. So it's still kind of off, but that's gonna pop you to about 1,200, 1,300, and then it has about an 8-day half-life, cypionate, ethanoate, and then that's gonna drop you down to somewhere around 400 to 700 before you get. That depends on the person, clearance, things like that, before you would get your next shot. So you took away diurnal rhythm and you're replacing that with weekly, bi-weekly rhythm that is no longer natural. So you can't take those studies and tell me that graded exposure to testosterone at the physiological thing is the same thing. Like, we can't do that.
And even if you did, the changes aren't that much in those types of changes in testosterone in terms of the actual amount of changes in lean body mass. We're talking about half a kilogram for 1 to 200 milligram change when you do look at HRT studies, if I recall correctly. So the
best one's Basin. Yeah, the best one's Basin, where they went from one. They didn't have a 200 milligrams, but they went from 125 to 300. And the 125 group gained about 3 keys in 20 weeks. So that's This is like Natal. So this is taking healthy men, putting them, like, knocking out their axis with a GnRH agonist, putting them on 125 mgs a week, and they gain 3 kilos of muscle. 3 kilos, like, we need to be specific here. 3 kilos of lean body mass. Some of that was probably water retention. And then I think let me go get it.
And again, that's going from 0 to be clear, like knocking out their axis with a drug intervention to make them hypogonadal by then adding and then giving them testosterone back in, to be clear.
Eric, who would volunteer for that study? Ooh. Like, they're knocking you out? They're knocking you down to 0 for science?
Yeah, man.
Whew. Those are brave soldiers, let me just say.
You see the ethical comments on these studies. You do see ethical comments coming on these studies. You still see them done. There was a big gap in this. Like, a lot of this literature is in the early 90s, mid 90s, and then early 2000s. And so the graded, like, this is a good thing to kind of iron us in. Like, so I said GnRH agonist, and so I've thrown a lot of vocabulary out there that people might not necessarily know. Gonadotropin releasing hormone, that comes off your hypothalamus. That has a 2 to 4 minute half-life. That is impossible to measure. Like, we can't measure that thing, right? And then the next one would be LH pulsativity. That is luteinizing hormone. That's what comes off your pituitary gland. And then luteinizing hormone tells your Leydig cells in your testosterone, in your testicles, to produce testosterone. So that's how that signaling access works. LH has a half-life of about 20 to 40 minutes. So we do have studies where they look at LH, and they look at LH and testosterone secretion. And remember, this stuff is complicated. LH is pulsatile, right? And so LH and GnRH are pulsatile, meaning that it's not like this constant secretion. So they're pulsing out on minutes and hourly basis. And so actually how you turn off the testicular axis, this boggled my mind in the beginning when I was reading this literature. I'm like, why is it a GnRH agonist? Why isn't it a GRH antagonist? I was like, what the hell? And so they're literally just blaring out the signal. They're killing the pulsatility, and that kills the entire problem. So literally, so TRT is kind of a massive tuba, right? If we think about variation, and then the same thing with this GnRH agonist. And so they take these healthy eugonadal males, they shut down their axis, and then they either add testosterone back in or they don't. That's kind of the basis of these studies. And a lot of these studies don't even have resistance training. So that basis dose response study, that's not even with resistance training. And that's around 5 keys for 300 milligrams, which is, just to let people in on a secret, like no one in the anabolic world is taking 300 milligrams to test. Like no one is. Like the next dose is 600 milligrams. And that one put on 8 keys in 20 weeks in healthy, and they recomped. So the 600 milligram group was the only group without exercise that recomped, meaning that they lost about 1 kilo of fat and they gained about 8 kilos of lean body mass in 20 weeks without exercise.
Damn. So that's why you go on.
Yep. And I think that's important because like if we're having this unbiased, non-fear-based conversation,
right,
we understand why the appeal is there. It works. There's a figure you cited, which I mentioned, I think we should definitely bring up.
Yeah.
People ostensibly get on HRT because it is this panacea, right? Where you're losing a key of fat, you're gaining 8 kilos of lean body mass. And, Ben, you brought up that it could result in a lifetime of needing to do this because when you go off it, you're going to potentially now actually be hypogonadal long-term and need HRT. But a lot of people might go, you know what? Maybe I'm okay with that. I'm pretty sure if I gained 8 kilos of muscle, I lost 1 kilo of fat, my body improved, I would stay on this for life. But I think it's really telling that that's actually not what happens. So can you talk to us about that figure?
Well, let's be real. So like, I don't think any doctor in the U.S. is going to give you 600 milligrams. Like, I don't know.
Well, some of those HRT clinics will.
I mean, they'll give you all the testosterone, and then you do what you want with it, right? Like you can put as much like
you're re-upping a little early, huh?
Is that Ben? Is that the legality of it? Because I do like for reals. I know some people not to reveal amounts, but I don't know. It's some sort of abuse is happening somewhere along the chain. So they give you the testosterone. It's up to your discretion how you administer it. And so theoretically, if you were to use more than prescribed, you just order it earlier and they turn a blind eye. I'm not trying to, give an attack on the...
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. I think like these are mail order systems.
Right.
They come to your house, right? Like these people sometimes have thousands of patients. Like you click a box, you get another box.
Right. Yeah. That's what I mean.
Like, I don't know. Like is it like I think it really depends. And I don't want to I want to be very, very clear. In every state of everything, there are people doing things well,
right,
ethically, really, really well. And there are people who are just doing things poorly and they're out there to make a buck.
Right.
Right. And so like there are people in this space who are doing it really, really well and they are changing people's lives for the betterment. And they are probably telling some people that this isn't for them. And I have friends that is them, right? Like, do you want to have kids? Okay, this is a different conversation then. Because if you knock out your axis, which is you're going to knock out 98% of your endogenous testosterone secretion, your intratesticular testosterone secretion, like so your testicles bathe in a lot more testosterone than is in your serum. It's 100 to 200 fold higher. So you knock out your testosterone, your endogenous production, and you will generally, around 2/3 of men will become infertile. You can bring that back with polypharmacy, but now you're on multiple drugs, right? So like, do you want to be on multiple drugs? Like, do you want now you're talking about, okay, estrogen's a little high, let me put on some Arimidex. Like, so now you're getting to like stacking. Like now, do you want to stack multiple drugs which have different side effects profiles? Do you want to stack those forever? Is that what you want? And I'm not trying to talk people in and out of that. That's not going to be everyone. But that is a very, very, like if you think about the side effect profile of TRT, it is things that people don't like. It is early phase alopecia. Like I don't know any guys that want to lose their hair. like, and that can happen real fast. Nodular acne. This is, again, you're just playing, like he made the poker reference. You're literally playing roulette. Like, you don't know if this is going to be you or not. And then you have infertility, you have testicular atrophy, and those are your main side effects that are not like prostate, cardiovascular disease, liver dysfunction. Like, those are just your kind of like aesthetic things that could happen. And I don't think that a lot of people are probably ready for those side effects. Like, most people, like, maybe you want to take drugs, you want to take off your shirt, right? And like, what if you take off your shirt? Like, I saw the other day, somebody, like, they posted on the gram. I was just on my search feed for some reason, and some dude was doing lap prayers, and man, whew, there's a lot of pepperonis on there. a lot of things, like
no
one of my
filter
friend's
could take it out.
girlfriends.
Yeah.
One of my friend's girlfriends, like, she likes like the pimple popping videos. Like, I don't like that stuff, but like, she would have had a heyday. And so immediately in the comments, you're like, oh, drugs, roids, like, you just see the needles everywhere, right? Yeah. Because there are some telltale signs. The other one is like rosacea, because you get an increased vascularity of the skin. And so, like, luckily you could tell Omar, Eric, and I, like, we don't have any of those symptomatologies. So you could, like, if you're going to go on.
I'm very pale. I'm not even red. It's unfortunate. I want a color, but I don't have any. So
this might be the pathway then. But I do. I think Ben, what
I was trying to make a very distinct point, and then Omar interrupted me, and then you went off topic.
I was going to say,
the specific figure that I'm trying to force feed into this conversation.
Yeah.
Was that how often do people stick with HRT? If they go into it thinking that this is awesome, maybe it's even worth it long term.
Yeah, so if you look at the research, Banderi et al. 2017, remember, I do think that we have some sampling bias here. I don't know, but it's 80 to 85% of people stop at 1 year. Like, that is so scary to me. Like, just objectively, you're going to go from, like, you're going to just take you're going to take a cycle that is basically physiological for no reason. Like, you're going to potentially gain, like, if you look at the literature, you could gain 3 kilos of muscle. I don't know how much that is. You compound it. I definitely think that it's going to be synergistic with lifting. I don't use the word definitely a lot. You got Andrews et al. 2018. They did find, it makes sense to me that you would have synergy here, because remember, like, the biohacker functional medicine people, they will tell you, like, oh, if you take androgens, your androgen receptor will downregulate. Androgen receptor upregulates with you put more androgens in the mix, and you get more androgen receptor. And so I think you do have a feed forward cycle here, and I do think that you have synergy. Obviously, you have synergy if you looked at enhanced athletes, like, you throw growth hormone, you throw these, like, it's pretty obvious that you have synergy here. And so that's, but TRT. Let's talk about the body composition effects, because if someone's getting it, like, they're like, TRT, I'm gonna get yoked. Like, I don't know that that's the case. Like, I think you're gonna get more yoked than you are right now. But do you need TRT to do that? Why not go to the fringes of what you could do naturally? And then if you're bored, then you can potentially have a different conversation. But if you're a dude, you got an FFMI of 19, like, you don't need drugs to ride the carnival, bro. Like, you can ride the carnival for probably 2 years, and be all right. Where I think where this gets interesting is where someone like any of us, right, who's been lifting for a long time, like, we go in, maybe we have a varicocele, our testosterone's borderline low, we've been training our faces off, right? Maybe say our testosterone is like 385 or something like that. We're just on the fringes, right? The doctor's like, oh yeah, you fit the bill. Here, sign on the dotted line. Let's roll. And so, but I want to have a very different conversation. Like, I want to check, all right, do you have a pituitary lesion? Like, what's, because, like, there's a lot of other things here. Like, what's your TBI history? I've had 3 hospitalized TBIs before the age of 8, before 8th grade, like, playing backyard football. And so, like, there's a lot of other factors here that people aren't necessarily looking at. Eric talked about micronutrient deficiencies. You have just, are you on a cut? Like, how many bodybuilder case studies do we need to show that low energy availability states, independent of body composition? In like 9, we have data like 9% body fat, so not even in essential body fat ranges, but low energy availability, testosterone's in the 200s. So like my first is if your first and only action is TRT, you're probably dangerous. Now, like if we go hunt, if we're actually going to have a conversation of where's standard of care, where should we potentially go here? That's a different story.
So is it possible that the 80 to 85% of men who take HRT for around a year and then stop, did they get cured? Or I mean, like, to me, the way this works, the only thing I can think of is they expected something, it didn't happen, they're dissatisfied, it didn't solve the problem that they came to solve, and they stopped. And I think that's really telling to me.
Yeah, I would agree. It's kind of sold as this panacea of like, especially for dudes, like you're gonna retake your masculinity. Like it's this holy grail. Yeah, your testicles are gonna shrink like that. Like I don't know if that's reclaiming your masculinity, but like that's objectively gonna happen.
Well, Ben, that does make. I'll just say this: it makes other things around it look bigger. So it's all about illusions, just like bodybuilding. Yeah. And if you've got a bag of worms, maybe you want a smaller bag of worms.
I do wonder if there's any like exit surveys or any data whatsoever to indicate the typical reasons why. Because like you're not talking. If I heard 20%, 30%, anything below 50%, I'm like, okay, that like maybe someone wanted to use it. They used it. They just want to see what would happen. It is overwhelming the amount of people that stop. So is there any information whatsoever, Ben, over what this large amount? Because again, 20%, 30%, that I think that'd be a normal attrition for, whatever. 80 to 85% is absurd.
I'm going to be completely honest here in what I think it is. Yeah. I'm going to give you my I let people know when I'm giving my anecdotal opinion. So I think it's so high because number one, side effect profiles that people they honestly were probably told about them, but we all know what you can do with side effect profiles. It's not going to be me, right? It's not going to be me, right? And it is you for like 64% of people who take them. So like the majority of people are going to have some level of side effects, right? And then the other thing that I don't think people know is I don't think they know that it's for life. I think they think that it's creatine. I think legitimately people think that it's like another drug that you don't like an antibiotic. I think they think it's like, oh, I'll just take this for a little bit and then I'll be fine. And so that's kind of the narrative that I want to quell is like, if you want to take TRT, great. I have no problem with that. You look at the literature on hypogonadalism, it does kind of, I don't want it to be a panacea, like to be honest, but it kind of is. Like you're talking about massive changes independently in metabolic syndrome. Like we've been looking for weight loss drugs for a really long time. You look at hypogonadal male studies, like you're talking about a kilo of recomp on a yearly basis. You take it for 6 to 7 years, like that's 7 for 7 keys without any dietary intervention. Like that's a big deal. And then we have some research like 5-year studies where hemoglobin C is dropping by 1.5 points. Like, so it's not like in the hypogonadal range, someone who is diagnosably hypogonadal. This stuff is pretty cool in what it can do. And remember, there are genetic reasons. There's drug reasons. Like if you were an opiate addict, if you had Klinefelter syndrome, if you had Kalman syndrome, like there's a lot of reasons why this could happen. But the one that I think is there's varicoceles are an interesting one that I don't think get talked about enough. Just like hemorrhoids and like anything pelvic floor. Y'all had a pelvic floor podcast. Like none of that stuff gets talked about, but the prevalence is so high in our community, and so varicoceles kind of flies with that because you're talking about veins and stuff down under. And no one really wants to talk about that. And so that's something that I think that if you have low testosterone, that's the first thing that I would ask. Like I would be like, do I have a varicocele? And then the next one that I think, and this is potentially the doctor's job. Like this is the person that you're trying to talk to, is you gotta see what's going on at the level of the brain.
I have a quick question, and I feel like I'm not going to want to hear the answer.
Oh no!
Is the only treatment for varicocele surgery?
I believe so. Surgical repair.
I'd probably be good with just having lower testosterone. Knives don't go over there.
But what's
I
the?
told my wife that if I get testicular cancer, there's a solid possibility I'll just die.
You're walking off into the
I can't deal
sunset.
with it.
You'll never see me again. I'm dying in the wilderness. But wait, what is the probability of success with said? So I assume you're put, under anesthetic and all that stuff.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not urologist.
63%. I'm like, what? Come on, dude.
Ben's like, this is not where this podcast is supposed to go.
No,
you
but that's
and
where
Omar
we're
freaking
fixated.
out about your nuts and asking me for medical advice. That's not the goal of the iron culture.
Ben, one thing I do want to say quickly when we're trying to come up with plausible reasons, not why people necessarily don't continue it, but I did share that anecdotal story of someone that I knew that decided to go on, that it basically, as far as I'm aware, several years later, the person is still on, but I don't think it did the thing he was expecting. And so when we use that description of it being a panacea, I do think when you note, Ben, some of the clear benefits, they are there. But to give it an example of this person who I think fits the bill in our lifting community, because I think there's the general population, right? Some reasons for TRT. And then there's specifically kind of our lifting community that would be, I think, more aesthetic focused, like body composition, muscle mass, virility, also associated with like virility and like perceptions of masculinity and all those other things, But there's someone that I know that once again was in that hypogonadal range. Allegedly, like once again, I do think to your point, which is so funny, I do think that there is that dimension of moral justification of essentially anabolic use, that some people are looking to sanctify their choices by either the state or by other people, so their personal perception. So they could say, Eric, like, hey, I went on TRT. It's not like, oh, I decided to go under anabolics. I decided to use these illicit drugs. And I will state this, my personal opinion. I do have some modicum of respect for the people that are willing to have that schism with society, that perception with like, oh, you know what? Like, I'm going to go on like drugs, like anabolic use. I recognize that the state doesn't justify this. There's that public perception. This is what I'm doing. The people that are kind of trying to worm their way, to use that word again, into using something that once again is state then sanctioned or government sanctioned or whatnot, institution sanctioned. Anyways, guy, low testosterone, convinced reason for not making gains, and a wide variety of other factors like his own psychological profile of himself, like how he feels, his low energy, all that. Anyways, becomes convinced, goes to see a doc. I think once again, Ben, when you said there's good docs and bad docs, unfortunately, due to the wide availability of doctors, I'm pretty sure you could Google the doc for you, if you know what I mean. So I think that was a situation that happened where he was able to find someone that would prescribe him. He did go on. It started off on a low dose for some of the reasons, but I think my subjective perception of him over that time and some of the problems that he noted that he had were not resolved. So let's say like mood irritability, like all those things, all the descriptors that reasons why, and even the more superficial reasons. Oh, I want to look better. Well, this person, when you said FFMI of 19, I will not give the estimated FFMI. All I'll say, Eric, is, a world-class bodybuilding coach. The dude wasn't putting in the work. He didn't have either the focus, the discipline, the fundamentals down pat. And I think he was using a clear shortcut, a perceived shortcut. If you said 3 kgs, Dr. Ben House, Mr. Dr. Ben House, like people on different amounts, and this person was on the high range, I couldn't perceive it, right? So it's like the lowest amount. This person, as far as I'm aware, has continued. I don't know yet. This has been several years, but that is but one notable example. I do know several others of some individuals, once again, of perceiving it to do something, and it very well, once again, can do those things, but it's almost like they don't match it. So it's like they just assume it's gonna pick up the slack, so to speak. So I can't help. There's a portion of people that, and once again, because it's subjective perception, maybe they just weren't aware of some of the benefits that were occurring, like the hormonal milieu that is happening, and their own perception. They're just like, yeah, whatever. Like, I guess it wasn't for me. But man, it blew my mind. Mr. Dr. Ben House, that this man is full on a cycle, basically. He looks terrible still, and his mood hasn't changed. And I was just thinking, like, you look at the literature, I'm like, but you're gaining some muscle, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, like, that's one thing that I would say that I would want to quell is that TRT dosages of testosterone are not going to make you fundamentally jacked. Like, they are not going to change your entire physique. Now, TRT with 10 years of really good training? Yeah. But what about just 10 years of really good training And so I've been kind of negative on TRT, and I didn't mean to come off as someone who is negative about TRT. I think TRT has great use profiles, like objectively in the right populations. Like I think it's good to normalize it, to be honest. Like I think it's really good to normalize it in the right populations. What I'm not down with is the direct to consumer ads of drugs. Like those are illegal on Instagram. Like it is in the use policies, right? So there are individuals who will just like, this is my anecdotal experience with TRT. I love it. It's great. It's amazing. It lets me do everything that I've ever wanted to do. Here's a link to the lab I use that I just happened to get a little something. Like, where's the line there, yo? Like that is so sketchy to me. And so that's where and there's literature on this direct to consumer advertising and how it actually is effective, how it gets men to go get tested. And then if you get tested, because this is a high rate in the population, you're gonna if people go fishing, you pay for ads, you're gonna get fish. Yeah. And so if the consult on the back end of that, here's what I'll just give people advice for. If the consult on the back end of that, if you are not paying, you are the product. If you are not paying for that consult, I can almost guarantee you that there is an EFT attached. Like that is just think of the economics. They are paying for that somehow. They are paying for that with a monthly subscription program. I don't have a problem with that model of business. Obviously, Eric and I both run on that model of business, like to some extent. Like you have a subscription-based protocol. I just don't sell drugs on that subscription-based protocol.
Small difference.
Small difference. But so
PDF.
Using the
TRT.
They both 3 letters, acronyms. I just want to say also, by the way, Ben, if you want to catch fish, if you're casting a net, as far as Eric and I are concerned, worms are probably the best bait. Like I think that's a well-known fact. You know.
I mean, I really do appreciate coming back to the varicocele joke because people are gonna remember it, and I'm always thinking about statistical probability, and I think the highest statistical probability for people listening to this podcast for you to have low testosterone that is transient, that is not really low testosterone. I think the main, you're probably not micronutrient deficient because you're probably in the Western world. You're probably not magnesium. Maybe you're zinc deficient. Maybe your magnesium or maybe it'd be a reach. I think it's varicoceles. I think it's other drug use like SSRIs, things like that you might not be aware of. And then the other ones, I think it's low energy availability. Like you've just been dieting for too long. And then dieting combined with bro, you just need a hard deload. You just need to back off and sleep for 4 weeks, right? And those are the biggest ones. And then the other one that we can talk about because it's kind of, you were talking about Jeff Nippard. Jeff Nippard's throwing out some neck training. I've been he posted before and after of his neck. If your neck gets above 17 inches, oh no, your risk of obstructive sleep apnea goes up. So that. Go ahead, man.
No, Ben, I was going to say, so our boy, Bryce Lewis, we did the same technique when he pulled sumo. I don't know. I got to measure. I think it is over 17 inches. I did a sleep study. I did a sleep test. It turned out I didn't have sleep apnea. But when I deadlift, I would do the neck extension. I saw, and I'm not saying this is the thing that caused it, but my boy, Bryce Lewis, has a thick ass neck too, and I see that. Except we're lifting with our neck, and people they comment on Instagram, "Oh, dude, you got a thick neck. How did you get this?" I'm like, "You don't want this." I think I'm bored. I'm borderline on that apnea. I do want to rewind just very briefly because you scared the shit out of myself and Eric. And just my one very quick question about this varicocele, and we could let it rest, Ben. And I'm gonna do the worm test. Is it the general population has a high probability? This is just a thing that happens amongst males, or is there something about lifting that increases?
It's got to be the Valsalva, right?
Yeah, what
pressure?
Yeah,
you're just throwing pressure down there. The prevalence in the general population is also high, 15%.
That's not 68%.
60 to 80. 60 to 80. It's worse than 68. It's worse. It's 60 to 80.
That's in the range, but that isn't the range.
So that's just one study. Let's not lose our mind. I think this is a really good thing. like population versus individual.
Right.
Does that population level risk matter? Like, so I said one in four males could have low testosterone if you sampled them over the age of 30, right?
No.
There's another test. There's another study that longitudinally looked at this, and they found that low testosterone in men over 60 with symptomatology was 2.9%. So that's a huge window, right? And if you look at, like, there's a huge argument that is had in that this low testosterone is being driven by those low outliers. And so telling everyone that there's testosterone, and I do think that testosterone does decrease with age. I think sexual hormone binding globulin does increase with age. I think those are actual things. But why not try to blunt that with healthy lifestyle, everything like that? And y'all know me, like, I get mad about fatalistic narratives. And so let's fight the good fight. And if it happens, it happens. And then let's have a different conversation.
Yeah. And I think, speaking of fatalistic narratives, the thing that I see the most among friends, colleagues, and people my age is, for whatever reason, they get depressed. And we know depression looks, let's say, non-stereotypical in men. It can be apathy, anger. It's not staying in bed with Haagen-Dazs, right? That actually sounds great. But when I'm depressed, I wouldn't even care enough to do that. And so they have, low energy. They don't get the same joy out of things they had. And because many men of that age as well were raised in a time point where you don't really admit weakness, you don't really like to go into the whole psychology of things, and you're involved in the lifting world where we have this obsession with testosterone, you start to place blame on the fact that, oh, maybe this is because I have low testosterone. So then you go get checked, right? And the disparity in above 60 of having, let's say 25% of them having low testosterone, only 2.9% of them having symptomology, meaning that, just because you have low testosterone doesn't mean it's actually the cause of your issues, which I think is the key point there. I think that's probably also driving that 80 to 85% number. That's at least what I've seen in my anecdotal experience. A lot of people, they get on TRT because they think it's the cause of their problem, when in reality, they need to re-examine their life. They need to do some therapeutic work. They need to figure out what is their meaning, And it's stuff that is not going to get solved by a needle. So I think that's at least what I see a lot, is people trying to explain psychological issues. But Ben, you touched on this, and I cut you off, as we've done many times in this podcast. You were talking about, hey, if the only experience you have at this TRT clinic is that there's a free consultation and then you get sent the box of gear, that's not a real clinic. That's a, the mass subscription for TRT, right? And what you really should be having is all of these follow-up tests to see what's the potential cause. And you started to talk about, hey, the next step is to then look at the brain. You talked about your history with TBI and all this other stuff. So let me, I'm going to kick it back over to you and let you complete, like, hey, sure, there are the bag of worms that could be a cause, but there's other causes, right? So what are some of the other things that can lead to someone having low testosterone that we haven't discussed yet?
Before I get it, I 100% love to talk about all of that. I don't so that 2.9% compared to like 36, 40%, like that window right there is hotly debated inside the literature. I'm just showing you kind of the differences in opinions here inside of the published literature. And so that's big, because if we think about these percentages on the population level don't matter to the individual. We care about ourselves, we care about our friends, we care about the people in our lives. So what are the risks that the cult has to think about when they're thinking about low testosterone, right? So they went to this clinic, right? Let's just play this out as a story, right? So our avatar, they went to this clinic. Their testosterone is, it's around 400. And if you look at the EROS study, which is not a great study in my opinion, but it's a study that we do have on overtraining testosterone. It's the best one that we have. It's in CrossFitters. I don't like some of the study design stuff, but I do like their categorization. And that's like under 400, you start asking questions. But guess what? That's not the only value that they have for overtraining. And I would say that testosterone is not a good value for overtraining in general. The best value for overtraining is like, do you feel motivated to train? It's a POM score. And so there's a huge debate about like diagnostic criteria for overtraining. Like, how do we even go find this thing? And so like, say you're under that. This is our avatar. You're under 400 nanograms per deciliter on a draw. Your sex hormone binding globulin is a little bit high because we know there's a lot of things that can drive sex hormone binding globulin in our world. Low energy availability, just training volume in general seems to do it. We've done an analysis of 30 dudes who have FMIs over 23, and the average SHBG was 45. And so normal, like that's a little bit high. If you don't know these numbers intuitively, like normal's probably like 30.
Can you give some just some background information as to why SHBG is important for the listeners who might not be aware?
Oh, let's jump down that can of worms.
Well, just a brief jump, just help them understand free testosterone. You know,
so this is a free hormone hypothesis is that 2/3 to 50% of your testosterone is bound to sex hormone binding globulin. The rest is bound to albumin, corticosterol binding hormone. So that's how testosterone is bound in blood. 1 to 2% of it is free. It's thought that sex hormone binding globulin, that complex to testosterone, is unavailable to cells. So it's just checkmate. You can't get it. We've learned that is not necessarily the case. There is a protein called megalin, which endocytosizes. So it basically takes in the SHBG testosterone complex and it takes it in. So that might be a way to get this androgen in. But by and large, you have free testosterone, bioavailable testosterone, and total testosterone. So if someone is borderline, the next thing that they will do is they will look at free testosterone. All right, and that's kind of what this person is going to do if they're just looking at testosterone values. And that value is going to be dependent on age, things like that. And so if your sex hormone binding globulin is high, your testosterone is low. Remember, if the clinic is bad, they just got to find one. They just got to find something, right? They just got to and sometimes they don't even find that. Like they just use it off symptomatology. Like this person had all the symptoms of low androgens. And you can argue that even might be ethical because I'll pose a question just for people to think. If CAG repeats are related to androgen receptor sensitivity. So if you had high androgen receptor sensitivity, would you expect your testosterone to be low or high?
Probably low.
Feedback, right? You would, and that's kind of what we see in the literature. It's not plain, but if you have low androgen receptor sensitivity, you could potentially have higher levels of serum testosterone, right? So remember, this is a complex. This is a system, and these are individuals. So I'll always use like a shoe size analogy here. So like if you're a size 10 shoe and now you're down to a size 6, you could still have all those symptoms. Like you could be low for you, right? And that's why kind of looking at this stuff serially is probably better than just one time point. And that's what we. And the other thing is like you look at the bodybuilding case studies, you're like you absolutely have to do this serially because you just have a lot of variation. And so we've found like you look at multi-stressor environments like special ops. A lot of this research is in special ops. Because they care about this stuff because they're going low energy availability state. They're going on missions, TBIs. There's a lot of clusters in that population. And also like you miss a free throw. I mean, that can be a big deal. I'm not gonna lie, but you miss a shot as a special ops person, like, you could die. So I understand why, like you are a trained warrior, like you probably you got to be on point 100% of the time. And so what they've found inside of that literature is sex hormone binding globulin goes up in these multi-stressor environments. We see sex hormone binding globulin go up with training. I'm 100% saying I don't know why this is. I've been trying to track down this answer for a long time, 5 years. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We definitely see it. Sex hormone binding globulin going up in trained individuals. Maybe it's some type of feedback, like the body doesn't want to. I think of like muscle's expensive, right? And so maybe we just don't have a lot of literature on super trained people. And so that's where my head goes. And then the other thing is like the only thing that lowers sex hormone binding globulin is bad stuff. Like go get diabetes. Like that's what that's what lowers sex hormone binding globulin. So that's the other part is like sex hormone binding globulin is super heritable, like 75%. So I don't necessarily know how we can move this thing. And yes, I would say same type of overtraining thing, like get your energy availability up, get your training down, see if you can move it down. But again, we even see this in the bodybuilding case studies, Eric, is that sexual hormone binding globulin consistently goes up when those individuals go, and then it does come down.
Yep.
It does come down to normal. So it does seem like it's some way for the body to protect against anabolism in a state where it doesn't maybe want it.
For sure. So we're finishing this narrative here. The cult avatar, they go in, they get all these things measured, and I don't know. Maybe we should talk through what happens in a good clinic where it's not just let's find something to prescribe you, TRT. So what are the other things that they start looking at? You mentioned the brain before.
Yeah, so a good clinic doesn't even they measure testosterone. They might not even measure free testosterone because free testosterone has so much variability. Like we're talking like legitimately like you have nanograms per deciliter and estrogens in picomoles, like so it's like picograms, like 10 to the negative 12. So the analogy I always use is like throw a Cheerio in a pool, like, and let it disintegrate. Like throw a tablespoon of sugar, like a teaspoon of sugar in a pool, let it disintegrate, and then go find that amount with science. Like that's literally what we're doing. And in pre-2005, that used to be really, really bad. Like 10 to 30% variation on the draw. Now it's down to about 6 to 5% variation on the draw. And so you want a good clinic, they know that. They know that variation. So like look at the measurements that they're getting. Are they getting an ultra-sensitive estradiol? Like and so estradiol is even less than testosterone, right? So you can expect a really good clinic to get more measurements upon intake, right? Maybe they don't get them the first. Maybe they kind of do this broad stroke net, and then they dive deeper, right? So if you have low testosterone, maybe the next time they would get a pituitary screen. So they would check LH, FSH, IGF, growth hormone, ACTH, TSH. So that's the next thing in the literature that they would probably do is they want to look at, is this primary or is this secondary hypogonadalism? Primary is a problem with your boys. It's the testicular factory is not producing, the Leydig cells are not producing testosterone. The secondary is the brain is for whatever reason is not signaling. And this is obesity looks like it comes on both tracks. Like it looks like it hits your boys with some inflammation, which the testicles don't like. And it also looks like because of leptin resistance at the level of the brain that it hits that axis as well. So obesity kind of looks like it's two-pronged. And then age is probably both as well. And then endurance training, you don't like, so that's the other thing is if you have low testosterone and your LH is low, that means your brain is not yelling for more testosterone. And so now you're kind of in this secondary. And so then they'll probably do some type of testing. I don't know what that type of testing would be. It might be an MRI where they look at your actual brain, or it could be some type of challenge testing where they see if you can produce testosterone naturally. And that would either be an HCG push, so HCG is an LH analog, or it'd be Clomid, clomiphene, which is a SERM. It's a selective estrogen receptor modulator. And to keep this short, what Clomid does is it's a brake on a brake. So it potentially blocks estrogen at the level of the hypothalamus, and that will tell your body to make more LH. That will tell your body to make more testosterone. So that's how a good clinic would kind of look at this in a differential way. And they are probably thinking about pituitary stuff right off the bat, especially in someone who's young. And obviously they've checked you for the bagworms.
Yeah. So you're saying if you just send an email of a test you got locally that says a value's under 400, and the next thing is that a box of gear shows up at your house, that's probably not a legit clinic. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I'm saying that. And the other thing I'll say is legit clinics, they don't. So if you look at the surveys of anabolic steroid users, they say that only 9% of physicians know what they're talking about when it comes to steroids. And I kind of agree. Like, so there's this mass anti-establishment. Like, you don't know what you're talking about, right? And I would say on the average, like, even the really, really good endocrinologists, urologists, wherever they're at, whatever their title is, they don't understand. I'm not saying all of them. There are really good ones that do understand the athlete's world. They do understand the iron game, but there are a large number of them who do not understand the iron game. And so, like, if you're not talking about low energy availability, you're not talking about, like, whoa, like, what is your body composition? Like, that's also a big red flag to me, because you could pay for a lot of testing that you don't necessarily need, because you're just super jacked and eating 2,000 calories and getting 18,000 steps a day.
I mean, I was not that long ago. I would say it was pre some of these bodybuilding case studies that we refer to, like they're, like, because there was 10 of them now or whatever.
There's a lot.
But yeah, in the mid 2000s to late 2000s, it was not uncommon, and I know people who did this. They felt terrible after contest prep, didn't know that that was normal, and then they were trying to mitigate their fat gain from binge eating afterwards, and they retained a level of low testosterone, but they still felt terrible. So they just went, you know what? It's been a couple months. I should be normal. I'm going to go to the doctor. And they go, oh, that's what's wrong. I have low testosterone. Not understanding, but that's actually the effect, not the cause. And they go on TRT. I've met a number of people who did that. I met people who decided to stop competing in natural bodybuilding, which is not what they wanted to do, because they thought they had a permanent effect from it, when in reality, they were just kind of in and out of this low energy availability state, trying to deal with the fact that they were binge eating post-show. And I think that fortunately is happening less often now, but we take for granted now in 2021 that we know that low energy availability and dieting causes low testosterone levels, but that is something that is niche knowledge. And I don't think most people would realize that, because we didn't even know that 10 years ago that well in our community. Like the REDS literature is only penetrating the lifting sector in the last 5 years. Really, people have only been talking about it for that long.
And think about the nuance there. Like, you have RED-S, right? And then you also have bariatric surgery leading to a 300. Like, that's wild. Like, so the nuance there in the population. So weight loss in a population that has a lot of weight to lose, there you get leptin resensitization, you get metabolic health, you get inflammation going down. But then so that's the cluster that maybe that physician knows. That's probably, they're more likely to know that cluster of variables.
Which is the opposite. So actually go back to that. You were saying that bariatric surgery results in what?
But it depends on the degree of weight loss. But bariatric surgery can, in individuals who lose a lot of weight, can increase your testosterone by around 300 nanograms per deciliter. So this gets to, if you are overweight, obese, over fat, if you like mathetones, which is essentially having central adiposity, if you will, that in and of itself is probably independently related to low testosterone, right? And so the cure for low testosterone there is, like, do I feel good about just adding testosterone in that situation? I'm squeamish, because, like, they have a lot of adipose tissue on board. Adipose tissue has aromatase, so they're probably going to aromatize that. They're probably going to get into polypharmacy. They probably have some underlying heart disease risk, cardiovascular inflammation type stuff. Like, do I really want to throw testosterone on that as a Band-Aid? I don't know. I don't think that I would do it if that person is not willing to do, like, lifestyle stuff. That's just my personal opinion. And so that's not our avatar, but that's probably the avatar that coaches work with.
And it's what doctors see. And it's going to be difficult for them to keep in mind, these two seemingly opposite effects of the same thing. Lose weight, diet, testosterone goes down if you're an athletic person who's already reasonably lean. Lose weight, diet, testosterone goes up if you were previously non-exercising sedentary person with obesity and metabolic disease. My
favorite example of this is the Longland study. It's a study, like, we all champion, right? It's Stu Phillips' lab. It's 2.4 grams per kilogram versus 1.2 grams per kilogram. It's the protein study, baby. It's 4 weeks of, 6 days a week of training, 2 days resistance training. Whatever. A really good study. 11,000 steps. Their testosterone went from 550 on average to 125 in 4 weeks.
While recomping.
While recomping. That's the famous recomp study. They went from 22. They were 22% body fat on entry. And they ended at about 17, if my memory. So they're not even getting down into essential fat ranges. You just blasted them with a deficit and a bunch of exercise. And it knocked out. I do think this is.
I've talked to one of the co-authors on that study too, and they said they were crushing those guys with the training.
Going from 0 to hero. And I mean, you do see going from 0 to hero in females. You see the loss of menstrual function regardless of where their body fat percentage is, right? So I think just putting that.
I just want to highlight that again, just because I think that blows a lot of people's minds who put testosterone on a pedestal, that they are experiencing body recomposition while their testosterone is dropping to 1/4 of what it was.
Yeah, I mean, it is not the thing that you think it is. I will say that, Corning et al., very hard name to say, did this study in 2004, which I never want repeated. I'll be completely honest. This is a terrible study. It's a placebo-blind study. And what they did was they did that GnRH agonist. They knocked it out, and they did resistance training, and they didn't give anything back. So they knocked testosterone down to 0. And guess what? Those boys still made gains. It was attenuated. They did not make the same gains as the placebo, but they did make gains. They did not see any changes in the myonuclear domain stuff, but they did potentially, you can read those papers. They did see that they potentially did not add the myonuclei to type 2 fibers, but even they said they were digging at looking at, so they did blunt the effects, but they still made gains with, for all intents and purposes, 0 testosterone. And guess who has a 20th of testosterone that we do? Females. And guess who gains 85%, by and large, the same amount of muscle, if you think about it, per frame? Females. And so do not get deterministic with this stuff. And that's kind of what I get mad about, is serum testosterone is turned into this bench press number. You could have a 500 and you could have a super sensitive androgen receptor, and you could be way better off than someone else, right? The most jack individual that I know in my life, testosterone at 450.
Yep. And actually, there's if you look at some of the research on strength and power athletes, they on average have low normal testosterone, which is probably an effect of them training so hard.
But the point is, it's
yeah, that's a good point. And worm bags, which is an effect of them training so hard. But the point is that it's not the thing that is preventing them from being world-class athletes, because they are, so.
Yeah, you get into reverse causality right there. And I get, so there's, I go weird places with this stuff because I've thought about it for so long. And I think that lifting, and this is something I don't know how to test it. It'd be such a hard study to test. I think lifting in that that puberty stage is probably really important, because you got a ton of testosterone around. And I think about that myonuclear domain. You talked about Alex with this. I think about really taking advantage of that time period might be important for your overall potential muscularly. And I'm flying by the seat of my pants there. I'll completely admit it. And that's a hypothesis, but it's an interesting hypothesis to me. In that if you lose that window, are you potentially not going to, and I'm sure there's exceptions to the rule, right? But I don't know that we can say your testosterone at the age of 30 is this. That means that testosterone is not important. I'm not willing to say that, because I think that there's 30 years before that it might have mattered in a dose duration effect.
No, I think this is great. I know we're getting off into tangents now, but Ben, you've dropped a tremendous amount of probably surprising information to a lot of people. You even wormed your way into surprising Omar and I at the very least. And quite seriously. And I know what we'll be doing in the bathroom next time we're there, in addition to what we planned to do while we were there. And nonetheless, I think I just want to open the floor up. Is there anything else you feel like at this point we have not covered that would be good to touch on to bring it back to home base?
Yeah, I think we finish out this avatar. That we got to add some.
He needs a name,
closure
Ben.
to that.
And I just want to propose Darren Dexter or Aaron Dexter. We just need someone so people can relate. It's not just like this, nebulous avatar. So Darren goes because he has an FFMI of 18.
So one thought that I didn't get to complete because I was fatalistic with that Longland study, and I like doing that. I like doing that because it like kind of blows people's minds up a little bit. You're like, whoa, they recomped and their testosterone went from 500 to 100. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And so, but I will say that I think that 100, I think that is a product of solely low energy availability status and potentially having so I don't know how to say the last name. It's again, special ops research, really, really cool. Pasiokis, they did the same study and even worse though, like metabolic chamber, like really, really low energy availability. But then they so I wanted Longland to what happened in 4 weeks. Just tell me what happened in 4 weeks. Bring them back up to energy balance. And so that's what Pasiokis did. I'm sorry, I'm probably murdering the name. And what they found is it came right back.
Mm-hmm.
So they had a group. This is a TRT study. So this is the kind of the crazy stuff that if the placebo arms in the TRT literature are some of the best exercise studies you will find, but you won't even find them in the exercise literature. So you wouldn't find this study if you did a meta-analysis and you tried to look at energy availability and study because you wouldn't find it in the search terms. And so the placebo study got sunflower oil and they did not resistance train. And they went really, really low in energy availability. We're talking 20, 25 calories per kilogram lean body mass. And then they brought them back up and they recomped. And their testosterone came back online. They rucked them. They did a bunch of other stuff. And that's one of the only studies that I can find that leads to muscle mass recomposition in a deficit that does not have resistance training. And that's actually how I found that study is I was looking for recomps. I was looking for any type of muscle retention studies that didn't have resistance exercise. And let me tell you, they're few and far between.
I think that's really interesting. And yeah, that's good because we don't want to be too, we're not trying to scare people. And I think it is good to know that much like, I know we've talked about this in the context of bodybuilding, like after prep, if you start eating and if you get back to a normal level of body fat for you, very high probability that you're also going to return to normal levels of testosterone.
Yeah, I mean, you've talked about reverse dieting versus recovery dieting a lot. Recovery dieting is not just for bodybuilders. Mm-hmm. Recovery dieting is for everyone who goes on a diet. Like the diet after the diet, that's the show. And this is the big. You see this fight now in the literature between Martins and the Obesity Society position stand, right? Like Martins is saying the metabolic adaptation that we see from weight loss is primarily going to be a figment of fat-free mass loss and not actually getting people back into an energy balance state. So there are labs. She's out of Blundell's lab, out of I think it's University of Leeds, and so there are people kind of fighting that fatalistic narrative as well, because we're not necessarily, even in the literature, we're not doing a good job of getting people back up to energy balance. So I don't want people to have long-term fatalistic thinking. If you lose 30 pounds of body fat and you gain 10 pounds of muscle, I have no idea what is going to happen to your hormonal levels a year from now if you are in energy balance. I have no idea. Go measure.
Yeah.
Eric, this has gone a lot of different ways. I do think I appreciate the open-ended nature of the conversation, because I will say, Ben, the way that it started, not in a way auspiciously, actually, I should say, that's the correct way, because it almost seemed to me, I haven't seen enough, maybe because I'm creeping up on that age, the TRT ads, but it's like, we're going to have an unbiased review of things, and then somehow it worms its way once again into a pitch for TRT at the end. It's like, I'm just going to give you some information. I'm going to allow you to make an informed choice. But I do like the open-ended structure of this conversation, because I do want to say a few things, and that is, one, It's unknown. I will state when we get into when I get into my 50s or 60s or what have you, I don't know. The question of TRT, I would say it's an open-ended question at that theoretical point. I have seen when it comes to composition, like I have seen Jeff Alberts, I have seen all the dudes throwing it down, Brian Whitaker in the 40s. In terms of composition, it wouldn't be that, right? And so it is something in the back. I can't say with 100% certainty that I would never consider it in the entirety of my life, in my existence. At the same time, I think what we see, and that's why I wanted to bring up, going back to the conversation, Eric, the mechanic analogy that I thought was interesting. Two things. That when we have financial considerations, I do think it changes things. That a mechanic is always, you don't know how to fix your car, you're going to go to someone knowledgeable, but there's always that potential for the mechanic to upsell you, right? So in a marketplace, you're trying to find the person that is most astute. So they actually have your best interest at heart. So they're giving you a fair price, a fair evaluation. And so there is a wide variability of services. And so it's our job as a consumer to try and select that. One of my concerns when we had this initial conversation before, starting the podcast and just the whole concept of TRT and those that use it and the reason why they use it and all those sorts of things is that it seems too often, one, there's the financial incentive, but also almost that survivorship bias where you said, Ben, the anecdotal. So it's like the testimonial. And I know this from being in a bit of marketing, how powerful that could be. Set the scene, right? Man, I was in my 30s. I wasn't motivated and whatnot. I was kind of at a loss of what I want to do. Finally, I decided to make the jump. I spoke with my doctor and I got prescribed TRT, and my life has changed for the better. And we see just like we don't see the graveyard, the 80 to 85% of people that no longer use it. And also, I do think because it is a way, much like this is a little tenuous, this analogy of, let's say, marijuana in the United States, like becoming legal, and then once you sanctify it, then you monopolize it and you monetize it, right? But
don't you stronger by science us. I don't need.
I'm
people
taking a fundamentalist stance.
Your jokes.
No, but I will say that once
I think people feel as strongly about testosterone as they feel about marijuana.
Yeah,
I think there are people that absolutely love testosterone, and it has changed their life.
Yeah.
And I understand that anecdotal experience. And I also understand wanting to share that anecdotal experience. And a lot of the doctors are those people.
That was going to be my question for you, Ben, because much like destigmatizing maybe, once again, like marijuana over time. And I think once you legalize it and then all the lawmakers like, all right, it's time to monetize this sucker. All of a sudden it becomes sanctified. Like, hey, the cure, like you have joint pain? Well, guess what? I would say my concern or the marketers or the people that now understand this is essentially a way to be able to market to a whole new demographic, a whole new service, right? So like TRT for the novice, for the general population. And you do have these loud voices of people. And I think it's interesting that they're almost, we spoke about this off camera, about, some people that may be pro overall anabolic use now kind of leaning themselves in a little hard into the concept of TRT, like the panacea of TRT for the average person using their own anecdotal experience that's not really analogous, once again, to what they're trying to market, but using themselves as the avatar of virility. I'm in my 40s, I feel great, and all these other things. Can you talk to me, Ben? I want the conversation because you spoke a little bit about TRT. I do feel this is almost like an informal consultation for the cult because the average age range, I would assume, for a cult member is between 25 and 50. And as you said, people would be lying to themselves if it hadn't crossed their mind at some point. So this is like an informal consultation, I think, for the cult, which is fantastic. But can you talk to me about the marketing dimension where you said you're inundated a little bit with us in social media concerning ads for TRT? That dimension and some of those, we said a amoral conversation we're going to have.
It's never ads for TRT.
Yeah.
It's ads for the test.
Right. Because that's what they have to do, right? Right.
They can't advertise on the gram for TRT. They have to advertise for the fishing. They're just trying to. It's not a bait and switch from a marketing standpoint. It's just like it's this value add. If you think about a marketing perspective, it's just like a value add, weird one where there's a potential EFT on the backside.
Yeah.
And it is portrayed as very innocent and helpful. That is how it is portrayed. And I think how we finish up that avatar. We talked about spidey senses on one of the podcasts that we did. My spidey senses with TRT is if you actually get TRT on the first visit. Like you should try something else. You should go that should not be the first thing. That should, like, even the Endocrine Society, this should not be first line therapy. The first thing they say, you should do some digging, and you should probably try some other things. The problem in the prototypical physician world is they don't understand the athlete world. They don't understand, like, okay, they might check you for obstructive sleep apnea, but then they just don't know this continuum and this cluster of variables very well. There are individuals, there are those that do, but by and large, I would say that the anabolic steroid users are right in that the vast majority of physicians do not understand the life of the cult. And so that's where you have to be super educated on these other things that could potentially be leading to this low testosterone value. And if you click on one of those ads, you go get a testosterone, you go to the draw center, think about it. When do you normally wake up? And then you go get that lab at 9 a.m. I just told you that there's a chance that your testosterone could drop 30% within 30 minutes of waking. Go look at the diurnal rhythm charts. Like, do you know? Like, do you know? Because that lab is not going to open until 8 a.m. And so there's variability. And the published literature and up to date, the Endocrine Society's position stands, just read them. And then ask the person you're talking to, have you read it? Because you should have. And it's really good. And it tells you what to do. It's not like this is hidden knowledge. The stuff that I'm talking about, it's not secret. The majority of these papers are open access.
Eric, he just bought himself a winning ticket to get on the Joe Rogan experience, the Joe Rogan experience, because a little minor modicum of anti-establishment was like, your endocrinologist won't know this. He'd be like, yeah, man. I mean, that's what I've been saying all along.
That's a tough sell, Omar. He's not nearly pro HRT enough to get on the Joe Rogan experience, I think. So it's that one will probably get batted around the room for too long for them to stay focused before they start talking about microdosing LSD. So I don't think he'll make it past that first line.
He just, all you had to say, Mr. Dr. Benhouse, was, I have some jujitsu clients of mine. They went on TRT, and man, their performance went through the roof. And can I just note something? I will say this publicly real quick. Eric's like, I'm about to distance myself from the statement. But I saw that Joe Rogan got COVID, and I just think it's funny where his overall stance on COVID has been, basically the summary, and no, I'm not, this isn't a caricature. It's not that big of a deal. And he's like, hey guys, I got COVID. Hey, it's not that big of a deal. Let me list to you 8 or 9 different interventions that I tried. And the vitamin drip, because this dude's rich AF, would cost several $1,000s. But again, it's no big deal. I was just like doing this, just to be safe or whatever. But hey, peace. I just loved his video. It was so silly.
Omar, that's how I respond to things that aren't a big deal. Is I spend $10,000 on 9 different ways to fix it.
Yeah.
So
besides the known way that would have, anyways.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Rogan is clearly on TRT. He's admitted it. He has rosacea. Yeah. Like, I have nothing against TRT. I have zero. Yeah. I have nothing against TRT. I don't think you're a bad person if you take TRT. I don't think you're a bad person if you make that decision. I just want to help people not necessarily make that decision in a way that they don't know what they're doing. I want people to make that decision in an active state of mind, because this could be potentially for life. And maybe I've been a little bit negative on TRT. There are some side effect profiles that come along with it, but it does some really, 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 really good stuff. And it's been exonerated from the prostate cancer side. It will probably result in a little bit of prostate increase in size, which will probably result in more people going to get checked. Most of us are always cancering, so then you run into a diagnostic bias. It very probably does not increase your risk of prostate cancer. If you have prostate cancer, it's a very bad idea. Cardiovascular disease is a whole mess, because I think inside of physiological levels, I'm fairly risk averse now that I've had a child. Before I had a child, I was like, let's live large, die large, leave a giant coffin. I was there, but had a child, that changed my risk aversion. And so cardiovascular would be where I would be a little bit squeamish, because you just had an endurance podcast. We talk about the athlete's heart. So this is a big deal. Like, you get bigger, your heart gets bigger. So you get left ventricular hypertrophy, and you potentially get a risk of arrhythmias. So there's another thing that so after maybe your doctor's amazing. Let's just play this out for Darren Drexler. And your doctor's amazing. It was the right choice to put you on TRT. It made a lot of sense. It wasn't low energy availability. It wasn't a varicocele. Everything. It was like this idiopathic. Didn't necessarily know why. Maybe you had a bunch of concussions when you were 16 playing high school football. And so we don't know why, but TRT was the right choice, right? What do they do then? Are they looking at your hematocrit? Your hematocrit is the amount of red blood cells that are essentially a percentage of your serum draw, which is red blood cells. If that goes over 51 or 52, you need to offlet blood because now your blood is getting too viscous. It's getting sludgy. So this is one of the big things with the cardiovascular literature and TRT is they did not control for hematocrit. And so like you think about the recipe for heart disease, high inflammation, sludgy blood, heart, just athlete's heart. Like that gets me, as of now, I'm a little bit squeamish about that. I'm not super squeamish if it's managed correctly. Physiologic ranges, checking things, looking at CAC scores. Budoff 2017, they found that testosterone could potentially increase your calcium, your coronary calcium scan. And so that's essentially my biggest lingering thing that I'm worried about. And remember, we do not have a ton of literature, very, very little, on supraphysiological. So I don't know what is going to happen at 200, 300, 400, 500 gram dosages. We just don't know what's going to happen. Is everyone going to die? Absolutely not. But what is the percentage? We're really never going to know. And that's where your individual risk assessment, your risk tolerance really comes into play. Much less worried in TRT land, but I will not make the decision to go super physiological. I will not make that enhanced decision. And that's my personal decision. You can call me what you want, but I'm making that decision. I probably would have made a different decision before my daughter was in the world. Maybe. I don't really know what I would have made. But now my risk aversion has gone up and I would not make that decision. Because I've done a lot of training and I'm guessing that I have some of that left ventricular hypertrophy. I'm guessing I have.
I think it's a fantastic summary. I think you brought home exactly what Aaron Disnexler should be doing. So I really appreciate that. I think you talked through every little bit of a caveat, and I just want to thank you for taking the time to put your expertise to the benefit of all the cult, to play out that archetype, both going through the clinic where he gets HRT immediately, run the other way, and the clinic where they actually assess everything, make a good decision, and put them on actual TRT, meaning not super physiological. Right. Guess what? Even if you have a script and you are getting the dosages that Ben was talking about, and it's super physiological, by definition, no longer replacing testosterone, you're adding it. So yeah, I just want to say thank you, Ben, and Omar. I think we can close it out there.
What is this, Mr. Dr. Ben House? Fourth time on the cult? No. Okay. Well, it is always a pleasure because you bring these topics to the cult that are very important. Like this, once again, I think every lifter will be lying to themselves if they said this conversation or some resemblance of this conversation hasn't come up to themselves or with someone else maybe in their lifting career. We learned a whole lot about worms, which we didn't want to know. I'm just thinking of a new male-centric cause initiative for maybe Iron Cult to start, which is Save Our Boys. It would be called. It'd be both Save Our Boys, those that participate in these heinous studies where they just like, hey, yo, we're gonna make your testosterone zero. It's like pull the boys out, and then also save the boys, like the boys. So just new little things that we're thinking about that we didn't want. Sometimes knowledge is the forbidden fruit. That's all I'm going to say. I want to thank you for being on. We'll link all your social media in the description. Always a pleasure to have you. Bro Research, go ahead and check it out. You can go ahead and leave a rating and a review on iTunes. That 5 stars, okay? You can leave whatever number you want. We're leaving the power in your hands. But it should be 5 stars, gang, gang. We'll go ahead and read some of those reviews. We appreciate everyone listening to Iron Cult. We'll see you on that next episode every single Monday.